my colleague John Briggs had got a question about the red line boundary. John, would you like to ask Ian your question?
Hello, Ian. Actually, I think things have moved on a little bit because as soon as I'd posted that question, you did your wonderful seven steps encore, of which number one was basically don't be limited to the red line boundary because that's not how green infrastructure works. So I've quickly got to rephrase my question in terms of the way you were commissioned. Do you find that you're brought into the planning process early enough that you can help to inform the extent of the boundary, so that that red line is not sort of vacuum packed too closely, if you like, into basically the area that is required for the development, plus the standard allocation of green space according to standards? Because everything you've been talking about here involves things that are influenced by links and what's surrounding the area to a great degree.
Yes, I'm a fantasist, so a lot of the vision of where we're going has been built on sort of an ideal situation. The practicality is the red line boundary is there and fixed for a particular economic or planning policy reason. Sometimes, if it's an allocation. The direction of travel, though, if one looks at offsetting through biodiversity net gain in England and environmental net gain generally, and systems thinking, and the emerging land use framework in England and nature recovery, I think there is a direction of travel through more coherent strategic spatial planning to see development and its wider context as something that's intimately linked. Part of the problem is not necessarily with developers, because I think there is appetite for seeing the bigger picture and how a site sits within its social environment and economic context and make those links, as you say. It's with the planning authority making the determination very early on around allocations and sites and the limitations they have to engage in the land outside of the policy constraints that they've got, engaging with local landowners, engaging with the funding regimes that are available to support different aspects of funding land use change that could support a new community. And when you've got a big piece of growth happening in an area of greenfield land, I think it is inherently necessary for the future to look to strategic spatial planning of communities and infrastructure and environmental infrastructure together. We're not there now. We've touched on it on a few projects and some work with Homes England, and some clients have given us the opportunity. But by no means is that something that's currently part of the system, and I think it will be. But you're completely right around the question, are you brought in early enough? No, we're not. But we will be. I am confident we will be.
Yeah.
Right, well,
okay.
On that point, Lee Haycoop had a question about that subject of when you're getting brought in. Lee, would you like to unmute yourself and turn on your camera and ask your question?
Yeah, hi Ian. Really good to see you again, and wonderful projects, and thank you very much for taking us through them, and amazing approaches. Yeah, working at Homes England in the Master Development and Design team under the Sustainability team, we, our work is about trying to get quality, and a lot of that is in the detail, devil in the detail, etc. So I'm really interested to know how you got called in quite so early. Well, what stage were you called in at? How you managed that? What were your client relations like? How did you go about having such wonderful access to, being able to say this is the approach that should happen?
At Columpton, it's a conversation that happens early on, is sort of early discussions around what the scope of the project might look like. I think Columpton's recognised as having quite a big impact locally, greenfield sites. So the client was, the local authority was amenable to a conversation around ecosystem goods and services. I think Thamesmead is a different kettle of fish. That we didn't do the ecosystems analysis, but I just wanted to include that because I think it's a beautiful project and lovely narrative. But it's still, even with Columpton, there is no control as part of the first phase master plan over the surrounding area necessarily. So we do need to find a way of making the links between what happens over there and what happens over here, and see how the funding could be leveraged out to support local landowners deliver for the project. But a project's got to wash its face on its own terms through the ES process, doesn't it? So I don't think we're there yet, but I think the direction of travel is, like I say, it feels like we're nudging towards more strategic spatial planning, which will unlock the opportunity for major growth to be supported by major environmental enhancement.
So I'm wondering whether, listening to you, I'm wondering whether, and do you think that actually an ecosystem analysis could be part of technical due diligence?
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, would that be wonderful? Yes. Yeah, I mean, that happens really early.
Yeah, it needs to happen early. We need to be very clear around why we're doing it and what benefits would be accrued. And also maybe take a bit of a mind shift in terms of what nature recovery strategies are seeking to deliver. There is huge potential when we read all of the government publications around land use framework and nature recovery. If we siphon off nature recovery as something other for nature alone, we're missing huge opportunities to deliver for nature and for the other stuff. And that's at the macro scale within a site, but also at the strategic scale. If they're othered, if they're separate entities and ways of thinking, we will miss huge opportunities to support nature recovery. And this is where the trade-off things comes in at the macro or micro scale. It may be that we don't deliver quite as much biodiversity gain as we could do, but by just knocking off a few percent of biodiversity benefit, we're delivering for improved public access and strategic flood alleviation, natural flood management. That's got to be seen as a benefit, but in what mechanism do the metrics work to allow us to do that at the minute? And that's why I'm really keen that we start thinking around environmental net gain and look at nature recovery, climate resilience, and ecosystem benefits as a whole. But that's way above my pay grade.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Ian, on that note, I was hearing from, speaking at a conference the other week, and somebody from a consultancy, will remain nameless, explained about how the product that he was selling enabled the developer to actually densify, because they were able to fit in much more green infrastructure using that particular product. So were you, for example, at Columpton, able to provide the developer with room for more buildings by making the network highly space efficient?
I'm not a master planner, so I'm not going to get sucked into conversations around densification. I fight the corner of the green infrastructure, but also of placemaking. And I think there is a role for densification, not the least because it can release land for environmental infrastructure, but also because it creates greater opportunities for convivial living. We look at models in Europe and they can be quite dense. It's just how we do it needs to be right, and right for the market and right for the people's lives. Worried by the word product and how that might be identifying the mechanism. I think there's got to be a degree of humanity in the way we design, and whether if that product involved AI, I won't sleep tonight.
No, I can assure you. I'm just trying to make it anonymous as to who the person was, but
I'm sure it's very, very clever and brilliant.
I mean, just to put people's minds at rest, it did mean that they got more green infrastructure in, less hard surfacing, and also the developer ended up with room for more houses. because I think the developer previously had been thinking, well, like I said at the start, I've got to provide play facilities, I've got to provide um, public open space, I've got to provide SUDs. How am I going to find room for all of these? And our friend just said, well, actually, a lot of these things can be combined in the same place. Some things can't, but a lot of them could be.
Yeah. That's a really just on that. I think meaningful multifunctionality is something which is quite difficult. And there's tensions between the classic example is those suds basins we see all over the place with a fence around it. And once that fence has gone down in 10 years, kids will be splashing around and playing in that. At the moment, they're fearful. And if we could just think about working collaboratively with the hydro engineer to design suds for play, that's a no-brainer, surely, and that would release more land for more green infrastructure or different densities of housing. But it's that role of design and collaboration and iteration. What are our priorities? What are our outcomes that we're seeking to achieve? And not compartmentalizing different disciplines into different outcomes. If we're all pushing for the same outcomes, it will get better results, surely.
Amen to that. And there is an example in Wales where a SUDS sort of 1 in 10 year return period basin was its primary purpose is for play, and it's designed not to drown the kids when it does serve its 1 in 10 year purpose.
The other one is road layouts. There's been some brilliant studies to a lot of housing estates that Place Alliance example at the outset, almost impenetrable road layouts, which just don't make any sense. There's no legibility. We can rationalize that right the way down and release significant amounts of land for green infrastructure. But it's the transport engineer or the designer coming into the conversation around placemaking. Sorry, the more questions.
No, I think that's a really good point to bring out. And the Radburn layout, is it dead? I've seen some very interesting stuff in the Bo01 development in Malmo, where transport has been changed. It's allowed densification, but it's allowed green infrastructure to come in all kinds of different places. But before we have to let you go, we have to have a green infrastructure statement for all new development in Wales. So how would you sum up your experiences in places like Houlston and Thamesmead and all the other projects you've been engaged in? How would you suggest that experience could be used in developing those green infrastructure statements to support new development over here in Wales?
See the green infrastructure statement as an opportunity to tell a really important and exciting and engaging story. We can fall into the trap of being very technical and very worthy. And there are technical requirements, obviously, that the green infrastructure statement has to get across about quantums and linkages and et cetera, et cetera. But it is an opportunity to be a fundamental part of the placemaking story, painting a picture of what this will be like in the future to live in or work in, or a piece of infrastructure that functions well. And again, if we siphon off the green infrastructure just into the statement, that statement's got to work really, really hard. But I would say do the statement really, really well and tell a compelling story. Think about your audience and a wider audience, but also get a lot of that green infrastructure into other elements of the project description, planning application material, because it's all linked. And if you separate things too much, you lose the rich narrative around transport, hydrology, et cetera, et cetera. So do a really great statement, but find ways to infiltrate and influence other bits and bobs, and also get them to influence the green infrastructure statement, like heritage, ecology, obviously, transport, SIDS. They can all have a little part in that bigger narrative around which so much, I think, depends in terms of the quality of the place picture you're painting.
That is fantastic advice, and we now have to find a way of getting that across to developers when they're producing these weird things that they have to do in Wales, and at the moment nowhere else in the UK. So watch this space for developments. I'm I'm going to let you get back off to your wife because I know you're supposed to be on leave at the moment, Ian. But first of all, I'm going to give one last chance for any of the members of the Green Infrastructure Forum to ask you a question. So going once, going twice, and going three times. Ian, in that case, let me say thank you so much for a fascinating presentation and for taking part wholeheartedly in these discussions. I'm going to record these, the presentation and the discussion, and post them onto the YouTube channel. So please feel free to to refer any clients or potential clients to those if that would be of any help. Thanks very much once again, and thanks to all the members of the Green Infrastructure Forum for participating in this webinar.
I'll say thank you as well, Pete, and thank you to everyone, and thanks for the opportunity, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Bye for now.